This week on the Regenerating Nature podcast, we are joined with our first guest, a botanist by the name of Tom Groves. Tom is very knowledgeable in all things plants and has a lot of experience in the field of invasive species management. So we talk quite a bit about that. We talk about proper chemical use and application and how valuable of a tool it is when it's not abused. And we talk about a variety of other plant-related topics, obviously, but we discuss, possible issues with the introduction of hybrid plants, both pros and cons, and then we even dabble a little bit in the controversial topic of giant miscanthus grass, which it was very interesting to get the perspective of a boots on the ground botanist versus someone trying to sell you a product. So hope everyone enjoys this episode. Please leave a comment, leave a review, some feedback if you can. It helps us know, what you guys took away from these episodes, if you enjoyed it, if you want to learn more about any one individual topic or not. And we just appreciate the interaction. And of course, if you want to reach out to myself or Taylor or Tom, feel free to check out the links in the description of this podcast. With that, enjoy. Welcome to the Regenerating Nature podcast. In this podcast, we cover all things nature and how they relate to our lives. And today we have a special guest. Our guest is Tom Groves. He is a botanist in the eastern part of the United States. And this is something that, we intended on doing when we started this podcast, is bringing in people that are in the trenches, so to speak. I like to talk to people that are out in the field, doing the work, dealing with people. And again, those interactions between nature and the human element. And I'm excited. I met Tom through social media. I was thinking about, this intro earlier this morning, and I thought of the words that I always say to my kids when they want to watch TV. I always say, watch something that's going to make you smarter and not dumber. And that's kind of the philosophy that I follow on social media. I try to follow people that make me smarter, have good information, good tips, or interesting information at the very least. And Tom is one of those individuals. He's posting great content all the time, variety of different plants. And I guess without further ado, I'll let Tom introduce himself and tell us a little bit more about what he does for a living and how we got to this point today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. That what you expressed there about sharing information and social media being that outlet for like learning something, that's what I'm all about. I think we have a huge disconnection with humans and nature right now in our current society, with tons of crazy stuff happening, and really we're missing that connection from our lives. And so even just knowing that you can go outside and see something new every day, out in nature, on a nature trail you may have walked on 1,000 times before, there might be something new that shows up, and how special that one thing that you find could be. I'm addicted to knowledge and like learning every day. So I finally found something that like will never run out of information, right? You can always, plants are that thing that you can go out into the woods and see, and you can see it as a macro, or you start looking at the seeds and you learn something completely different about the seeds that you didn't fully understand, but you like sort of knew some information, and now you're connecting it and you're like, oh, that's why this is for this, or you start making all these connections, and then your life changes. It makes it, I don't know, it's what I'm living for right now.
No, I totally get it and can relate. And from my, in my experience, the more I learn, the more I notice in the woods, right?
Yeah.
So you can walk that same trail multiple times, but then all of a sudden you learn things, you accumulate that knowledge, and then the next time you walk that trail, you notice those details, like you're saying, or you notice a plant that you didn't notice before, and then you start to look at those details and you learn a lot more from that.
Yep. And so I started as I have a degree in wildlife biology. Um and as I don't know if you know this, but like there's a drought of botanical degrees that you can get, right? So botany is basically disappearing from our educational system. Um, and so I had a plant taxonomy class that was part of my wildlife biology degree, and that all of a sudden made everything click for me. And I was like, this is what I want to do, except I was in a wildlife biology program. So I found how to feed that outside of the classroom. So I volunteered with native plant organizations and started doing surveys. And that's where I got my extracurricular botanical knowledge. And then I was hired as like an invasive plant habitat technician. And then after that, for the past 8 years, I've been working for a forestry company, which is really like three companies under one umbrella. So it's forestry, logging, and then woodland services, which is what I headed up. And it's more or less the connection between those two, right? So you have, proper forestry, you need to take care of invasive plants and do proper habitat management before you log. And so it's really hard to find companies that are doing that work. And so this company built that into their forestry logging company so that we have in-house foresters who will do the forestry work, prescribe, they'd send me out there to look at their invasive problem, then we assess it, make a plan, give them an estimate, they sign on to do the work, and then probably in that forest management plan, 2 years out, there's a patch cut that's going to get done, or they're going to do a shelter wood harvest, some sort of mechanized harvesting is going to go on. So we need to address the invasive plant problem first before we get there, because I can work for anybody if it's plants, right? But their focus is timber. So I can, think about what their management goals are and sort of help them get there to grow better timber for the future. And so that's what they wanted to do. So that's what I've been hired to do in-house. And alongside that, there was, I do work for like Army Corps, wildlife refuges, the state. I work in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts doing invasive plant management and all sorts of habitats for all sorts of different organizations and people. So it was really, and that's really what I wanted to do, right? I wanted to get out of the forest and go to like the sandplain habitat down on the Cape and like do some sort of work down there, and like you'd find rare plants, and it's all part of the same thing. My interest in it is really like the herbaceous stuff. And so I just got a job. I'm going to start a job next week working as a rare plant botanist for an environmental consulting firm. So I'll be doing sort of all the same thing, except not doing invasive plant management anymore, just like doing surveys, writing plans, and then sort of helping contractors figure out the best way to manage their invasive plants in these places with rare plants in mind.
So
I have a
oh, sorry, go ahead, Taylor.
I have a quick question about your invasive strategies.
Yeah.
Have you ever deployed goats?
So I'm gonna like put a caveat on how my invasive plant management works, because I'm a contractor. I got you could be doing invasive plant management on your own property, but where I'm a contractor, I have a very fixed amount of time that I can do work, right? So the growing season is like my go time. I have seen instances where goats have been used. One example is Putney Mountain is a mountain around here, and it was a bald ridgetop that had gotten taken over by glossy buckthorn. They didn't want to use chemical to control it, and so what they did was they brought in goats, and the goats nipped all the invasives at about knee height. You could tell because they had a strange little like side cut on them, right? They're cut at an angle. And so they had nipped them all down, but then they all resprout. And so now, originally it was one stem. And when they cut it, the hormones change, and now you have multiple stems. And glossy buckthorn flowers that are really small. It can flower very soon after that, and like 2 or 3 feet high, they'll put on flowers. So I guess it's a long way of getting to chemical is a really easy way. It's cost effective. If you talk about it and you get a really good applicator, and you ask them the right questions, they're going to know what percentages to apply to limit any sort of overspray or contamination. They're going to do it in a smart way. The goats, if your goal is to like get rid of, glossy buckthorn and manage that property as best you can, what you're doing is you're sort of extending your treatment period to a number of years after that. You could be potentially increasing the number of seeds that are going into the soil. And goats don't know the difference between a native plant and an invasive plant, right? So they'll end up sort of eating everything. One of the benefits of chemical is you can target specific plants. And the other side of that is you get natives sort of helping you to compete, outcompete the invasives now, right? You've just sort of like turned the tide a little bit and given the advantage to the natives to sort of take over that area and shade out any potential new seeds or invasive seeds.
Gotcha.
Are there any types of invasives that you have seen that are more successful with animal integration with the goats like that?
You mean that like propagate themselves more because the goats are there?
Or that are, I should back up, clarify that. Yeah. It's a certain species that can be managed more effectively with goats.
Now see, I know that from listening to your podcast, I know that you guys have livestock. And I don't know that the Putney Mountain thing is one example. And I guess when I was talking about me being a contractor before, is that I need to be able to do something for a client that I know is going to work. So the goat grazing thing, I think it could work in the right situation. And if you have them on your property already, like as a resource that you're using for something else, rotating grazing animals around like a field edge to clear it out or something like that, like that's totally a viable option for you as a landowner. But from my perspective, as somebody who wants to go there and do the best job they can in the shortest amount of time and get that ecosystem back to something that's like managed on its own, kind of, using a small amount of chemical is the way to go.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. We've seen some uptick in actual like goat grazing contracting in this area.
Yeah.
But what you're describing makes a lot of sense, because most likely, say there was no chemicals and the goats had the one job to, knock back the buckthorn. Would the smartest time, or would this be like the most sensible solution, hit it, put them in there for a short amount of time in the fall when the buckthorn is most susceptible? Or do you think that it doesn't really matter timing? Or would it be timing and pull them out and maybe even like mow the sprouts?
Yeah, I sort of group, livestock animals in the mechanical control category.
Yeah.
And that's only because, the same thing would be me going through there with a brush saw, right? Every couple of weeks and mowing down the resprouts that are coming back and sort of trying to run out the root system. The problem with sort of not doing it, starting that process and then not doing it, is that you're causing that plant to have a lot more stems than it did before. And so the possibility for more fruit creation, which is what you don't want to do. So, I would say if I was going to make a management plan with that species in mind, I would say put them in their early season before it leaves out and can flower, because buckthorn's going to flower in like June, middle to late June. And so I would have them in there mowing those things down as soon as they could. And then just like I don't know, it's a hard thing too. Like you have to have somebody manage that, bring the herd in, fence them off, right? And then move them out of there, I guess, or maybe leave them there. I don't know if there's enough food. I don't know a whole lot about livestock in general, but those would be a lot of questions you'd have to ask and sort of know, am I going to make a 4-section plot and rotate them around all summer? And that's going to be my acre of buckthorn control. I mean, they eat a lot, and they can do a lot of like full on damage. You know,
Well, buckthorn it's interesting that you brought that up, because I feel like that's one of the biggest issues in this area as well.
Well,
yeah.
And
I think we should clarify, because we deal with common buckthorn. That's different from glossy buckthorn, correct?
Different genus. Yep. We have both glossy and common buckthorn. Common buckthorn, yeah, is like a whole another animal. I sort of rank that up with another really hard invasive to control, which would be swallowwort. So I sort of put those two together as like one of the hardest to actually get a handle on. And I think you need the right situation, common buckthorn in a shaded environment. If you're doing cut stump on that, the likelihood that they're going to resprout and come back is very low. But if you're on the edge of a field or something, or in a wetland open area, I have seen cutting and dabbing not work so much, and you do get a lot of like resprouts coming back. Those seem like very hard species to kill over time.
So you're saying even if you
that.
cut it, even if you cut and treat the stump, you still see them come back?
Yeah, I was just at a site yesterday or Monday that was on the edge of a field, and we had cut stump. Sometimes we cut them high so you can like recut them later below all the shoots that come out, and then dab it again. And so those were all resprouting, most of them. And now the person who was there, that wasn't me, but the person who was there may not have dabbed those. So I can't verify that it was actually treated or not, but I'm suspecting that it probably was. But the ones that were in the woods that were just back like 10 or 15 feet in a little bit more shade were totally smoked.
Okay.
Do you think so? I had a forester tell me one time that he'd recommended late fall hitting that common buckthorn and then painting the stumps. But you just said that the seeds had actually already dropped by then, right? So
yeah, so you want to, invasive plant management, you want to think about a few things. You want to think about what species you're treating. So there are a few species that I would group into very specific times of the year. So poison parsnip is an early season plant. You want to treat then. Wild chervil, swallowwort, those are all going to be in garlic mustard. So May, June. And that's because for those particular species, you want to get them before or while they're in flower, before they make seeds. The other ones, your buckthorns, honeysuckle, multiflora rose, euonymus, autumn olive, all of those, barberry, all of those things, you can probably guess that there's probably already a good sized seed bank. And so, and again, being a contractor, you have a very fixed amount of time, right? I work on like 1,400 acres in the summer. So I have to draw a line somewhere. And so I assume that there's enough of a seed bank of that buckthorn in the soil that I can treat those during the regular growing season. So I usually lump all of that stuff, all my woodies, which I would call woody invasive plants, into like June, October. Now, the other species there are knotweed and Phragmites. Those are all going to be at the end of your season. So you want to treat them in like August, September, October. And that's because they're really going to be taking all of their nutrients back down into their root system. And that's really the best time to kill them. If you treat them early season, it doesn't really work. And they'll sort of, if you don't hit them hard the first time you try to kill them, it'll be worse. It sort of like lingers for a long time because they get a little dose of the herbicide, but they're not really like fully dead. Then we can talk about some specific anecdotal examples for that if you want. But in terms of your comment about treating late season, if you're doing mechanical control, you need to do that throughout the season, right? If you're doing chemical control and you're doing a cut stump application, the best time to do that is like the middle of July to the end of the season. And you can generally do it until the ground freezes. So if you get a warmer December, you can be treating cut stump in a a 50-50 mix, water and glyphosate product on the stump after you cut it. A few things you have to be careful of. You have to make sure you do a flush cut. So jaggedness in the stump is going to interrupt you trying to get herbicide into that root system. And if you don't treat you only have to treat the little tiny, it's like almost microscopic line around the outside of the tree, right? That's the living part of the tree, the cambium. So if you just need to get the herbicide on the outside of that. So you don't have to treat the whole stump, but you have to connect that circle. It's kind of just like a girdle, right? If you don't connect your girdle on your tree, that little part that you have left, that little tab is going to connect above and sort of bridge it and continue, allow that tree to keep growing.
Interesting. Yeah, that's well, one thing I guess, with timing right now, it's probably important to note, anyone listening to this now, that spring is probably the worst time to do cut, stump, and treatment, right? Because that sap's starting to flow up from the root system.
Yeah, this is like my off season right now, and really things like mechanical control can work early season for like garlic mustard. If you have something in a very small patch, small plants are easy to manage by hand. As they get bigger and taller and the DBH gets a little more, like you can't pull those out of the ground, or you need like an excavator to do it. And even then, you're probably going to break the roots off and you're disturbing more soil. So there's more seed germination, which chemical doesn't do, right? Because you're just doing a foliar treatment on the leaves and it's going to go into that root system and kill it. And you really aren't disturbing a lot of the soil around those species. So you can potentially run out some of those seeds by keeping them in the soil. And yeah, so spring is a horrible time to do any treatment. And normally the best cut stump to me is like a step down from my preferred treatment, which would be a foliar treatment. So I think of all of this as a surface area ratio equation. So like, the more leaves you have on a tree or a plant, the more surface area you have. So you can apply herbicide in a much lower percentage, but you're going to apply it on almost every leaf. When you get to cut stump, your surface area drops to that small amount, and you have to up your percentage to a 50-50. But I want to treat healthy plants to kill them effectively. So I generally tell, and there is a place for mechanical control and then chemical control later. There usually has to be a long amount of time in between there. So at least a season, but if you can wait a full cycle all the way back, like if you mechanically control the field edge in the spring, and then you waited until the following summer to treat it chemically, that would be the best, because your plants are going to be as close to being healthy as they were before you cut them. But I would prefer not to cut them and treat them with a foliar solution I really don't start treating until June 1st in Vermont. I can sort of push that if I go down south a little bit, because it's leafed out earlier. So that's a little bit further along in the season. And then my foliar season goes until October 15th, roughly. And that's kind of guessing. I have to watch the leaves and see when they're yellowing and how close they are to actually dropping off the trees. But as soon as that happens, then I go into cut stump season.
So when you say mechanical treatment, right, you're mowing it off.
Yeah.
And then you say you wait until the following summer, so a full year or a couple months later?
And part of this depends on what the landowner wants. And sometimes depending on the agency that's involved, I try to give them the best recommendation that I can. Sometimes contract dates don't allow that. So, most of the time, if I can get them early enough, they'll listen to me and they'll be like, okay, we'll make this contract 3 years long, so that I can have some play in picking the right time to do the treatment. It could happen that you do that mechanical control and maybe you really don't get anything that looks like it's really treatable until, maybe it's 18 months later. It could be depending on the species and what you have, it could be a wait. So it's like, you try to hedge your bets as best you can. So I would say, if something happened in the spring, the earliest that it could happen would be like the end of that season. So, you could do September, early October with a foliar control on something that was mechanically treated like now.
Okay. No, that all makes sense. I mean, that's typically what I prescribe on my client properties. Very, very similar tactics. And I guess, yeah, it just really does depend on how fast that plant regenerates, right?
Yeah.
But everything you're saying makes perfect sense, because when you treat a healthier plant, it moves that herbicide through the vascular system a lot faster and more effectively, right?
Yep.
So a mechanical tool, would you consider a forestry mulcher?
Yeah, that's what we have at the company I currently work for. We have a Barco with a big excavator with a big forestry mulcher on it, and then we have an ASV like skid steer mulcher with a deck.
Yeah. You just knock it right down to the ground.
Yeah, that big excavator mounted one is pretty cool. You can like knock off a tree like at 10 feet or something, and then
grind it down.
Right? Yeah. And that's something to be said too. Like some of that mulch you're putting down is going to suppress your seed bank. So, depending on how thick it is. So there's a lot of like nuanced little things that go into, looking at a property and then like weighing what the landowner's looking for, what makes sense with timing. Maybe the contract got some weird thing in it or something else has to happen, but you have to sort of like blend all those together and then come up with a plan that like you're comfortable with and makes sense, and like ecologically it's the right thing to do.
Have you ever experimented with like broadcasting a like something that would cover, like grow quickly, germinate quickly, and then kind of help cover the ground?
Yeah.
Like a rye, or if you had enough sunlight like coming through.
So an anecdotal tale I have is not far from the shop that I was working at. This had no chemicals at all. It was a field, an old apple orchard that had been taken over by bittersweet and rose, all climbing up in these gnarly, nobody had pruned them for years and years. They were just like way taller than any apple tree should ever be. They went through with an excavator. They wanted to turn it into a meadow. So they took out all the trees. And there was tons of buckthorn in there too, like wall to wall dog hair buckthorn. Pulled that all out. They root raked it. Okay. So they had a machine, they pulled out all the roots, burned all that stuff. Then they seeded it super heavy. I don't know what they used. It could have been a rye or something like that, but they seeded it really heavily. And I never saw another buckthorn in there. So there's different approaches for everything. And like something has worked at least once. And I don't know how much that cost, or like that guy sort of like is the caretaker for that property. So we probably had endless time to sort of do it that way. And I haven't been back there in a few years, but we also did chemical control there in the woods because you couldn't get the machines in the woods. So we had to do a chemical control, and we've like restored that property to something that's way better than what it used to be. And I drove by it recently. I didn't see any buckthorn coming up where we did chemical control either, but it would be cool to go back and do a survey. But at the very least, they got a huge handle on their problem, and if somebody was there, a landowner was there and cared about it enough to have all that work done, they would be out there, walking that thing, hand pulling little buckthorn seedlings to make sure they weren't coming back and invading that area.
I should clarify something for our listeners, because I feel like every single episode we've had so far, albeit 4 of them, we negatively talk about chemicals a lot, right? But here's the thing is, and this is what I tell all my clients, that, and you've already hit the nail on the head, chemicals are a very, very valuable, useful tool in a land manager's arsenal, right? The thing that I try to promote is that we should all strive to have a chemical-free routine, but those chemicals are very valuable in implementing or improving the habitat or restoring that native habitat, which you just showcased there. So, with that being said, after the initial treatment, what are your go-to management practices going forward, especially in an area where that seed bank is full of invasives.
Yeah. Can I say something about chemical?
Yeah,
Real quick?
absolutely.
So, I talk to a ton of, it sounds like I'm like you, a little bit of a consultant. You go and talk to people. I get the questions about chemicals all the time. And I sort of frame it, glyphosate is the product that I use 98% of the time. It's and it gets a bad name because of industrial farming.
Correct.
So glyphosate is in this light right now, and it's getting targeted because of it's getting dumped on our food. It's getting dumped on our food on GMO crops that have really poor soil that run off into our waterways in concentrations that we probably don't like, and it causes big problems, right? In huge quantities. Every state, I'm not going to say every state, in Vermont anyway, I'm sure that you can do this in other states too, but you can go and look up per category an applicator's license. So I have a forestry license, right, to apply chemical. There are categories for golf courses, lawn care, home pesticides, all of that stuff. And you have to report at the end of every year what you used and where. And they aggregate all this information by county for your state per category of license. So you can go see that golf course down the street from your house, right? You can go see how much those golf courses in your state are spraying and what chemicals they're spraying and what amount. So if you take the forestry license, compare it to the golf course license, turf control, right? The forestry license has like 4 herbicides and the quantities are extremely tiny. You look at the golf course and the lawn care, it's like pages of different chemicals, pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, all that stuff. And the quantities are astronomical. So, I talk about chemical from the forestry perspective where you're going to apply it once a season, right? We're going to hit it once that year. And then we probably take 2 years off because we're going to want to maximize our chemical use on the highest number of individuals of invasive plants that come back in those subsequent years. So I don't want to go back to your property the next year because there's going to be plants that germinate and resprout in between then that I want to follow up on and manage, but I want to maximize your dollar, right? Use as little chemical as I can, and then maximize my time there to make it efficient for me. So you're going to have seedlings and sprouts come back. That's usually what you see. Now, if it was like high density invasive plants, we hit it hard, knock it all back. Those mature plants are dead. You're going to get more light onto your soil. So you're going to have those invasive seedlings germinate. If the landowner wanted to do that on their own, if they really just wanted to spray herbicide that first year to sort of give them a toehold into doing it on their own, they could be out there hand pulling those small seedlings that come back. If the landowner doesn't want to do that, we can come back 2 or 3 years later and do a very, pulled back approach to application based, compared to that first one. So it would be like guys walking through the woods with backpacks and doing like a very targeted approach for herbicide. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's funny that you brought up the golf course thing because that was one of the things I wanted to talk about later in this conversation is how, basically the lawn care industry is, almost as big, if not a bigger problem than the ag industry, right? Because the way that I see that is, big ag's one thing, right? We can all agree that there's issues there, the abuse of the soil, just that constant usage of chemicals and synthetic inputs, but at least, and for better or for worse, at least that's producing food, right? Mm-hmm. Which, again, it's not all too appealing or appetizing by any means to consider the fact that you're consuming all this food with all those chemicals. But when it comes to the lawn care industry, I mean, it's 100% for aesthetics, right? And that's the root problem of it is all this lawn, all these chemicals nonstop all the time for what? Just, if you're in town just so you can keep up with the Joneses next door, right? Because that guy's got a nice clean lawn, so you need to have a nice clean lawn. So might as well hit it with 2,4-D because there's 3 dandelions out there, but who knows how many more are waiting to pop up, right?
Yep. Yeah,
It's
I mean,
the attack of dandelions.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of misinformation out there about, and some of it comes from, you know, that part of the industry using Roundup. Roundup is like, people know what Roundup is, but they don't know what glyphosate is, you know, or they haven't heard that, or they pronounce it a different way. And
Yeah.
like, so Roundup, you know, this is the other thing that I pitch to people is like Roundup off the shelf at Tractor Supply or whatever supplier around you for like feed store stuff. That stuff you get off the shelf is not the same as what I use. So I use a wetland approved version of that. And that means I get it not pre-mixed with surfactants. So surfactants are the soap that sort of breaks down the waxy cuticle on the leaf and allows the herbicide to get into the plant, which will allow it to get into the root system. So that stuff that people are buying off the shelf at Tractor Supply is made for grasses. So you can't take Roundup. It has a very soft surfactant in it. So it's not strong enough to like penetrate into woody plants and kill them like I can with a stronger surfactant that I mix proprietarily. You know, it's a 90. So the AI or active ingredient is a 90 in that particular surfactant, but it's water soluble. So together with that glyphosate, you can make a wetland approved version that I use in uplands or wetlands. So that's what I mean when I say I use that 98% of the time. I'm not buying the Roundup that we buy off the shelf. I'm actually buying something that works. So again, I'm maximizing the amount of limiting the amount of chemical and maximizing my kill by doing something that is actually going to kill woody plants in like a timber setting.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, my go-to for these initial attacks on invasives, and in our area, multiflora rose, bush honeysuckle, buckthorn, common buckthorn, and Japanese barberry are probably the main culprits as far as the woody species go. But typically I try to wait as late in the fall as possible, you know, when all the native plants have went dormant, and then hit them with a foliar spray of about a 5% solution of glyphosate or so. Is that similar to what you use for that type of application?
Yeah, so what I do is I break down for backpack foliar. I don't use water anymore. I use a product called Thinvert, and it's sort of like a sticker. So I don't use a surfactant with that because it is the surfactant. That's also wetland approved. And so what that does is, you know, with water, if you read the label is the law. If you read that label, it says, apply this herbicide to wet, which means just until the leaf starts, like a little bead of water will form at the tip of the leaf. So you have to have full coverage on that plant to kill it. But with Thinvert, what it does is you up your percentage to like 7. So you have 7% mix. And it kind of has it's a little thicker than water. And so you have little dots that show up. And so you don't have to, and what happens is over time, that little dot sort of spreads out on the leaf. So if you would imagine, like, you know what gasoline on asphalt looks like?
Yep.
You drop a little gasoline, it spreads out. It kind of does that. So you get a little dot on every leaf and it spreads out over time. So you can use a very small amount when you apply it to a plant with a foliar solution, and you can kill a lot more stuff. So just, you know, ballpark, if 2 gallons in a backpack would last me, you know, half an acre, I can do 2 gallons of Thinvert and I might do 7 acres.
That's major difference when you're,
but it costs
hauling a
10
backpack
times as
around.
much. It's
Okay.
10 times the cost. But you can do, you know, it saves you time going back to fill up, right? I can use a lot less chemical. I don't have to be like as targeted. You know, I can sort of just like do this thing and I don't have to like sit there and hose something down. And then if your density gets really high, that's when I sort of bump to a water-based application. And what I do with that is I apply that through a UTV mounted sprayer. And so that you can bump down to a 1 or a 2% solution. So that's 1% in 50 gallons is a half a gallon. So, and what I was talking about before with the surface area equation. So now I'm going to hit both sides of the leaves on the entire plant with this water base, but I'm going to use almost nothing. What I'm spraying is majoritively water, right? But the density is so much, it might be a monoculture. There's nothing that I want to save. So I'm gonna hit that thing hard, and they might be full-size plants, but you're gonna save time. You're not gonna cut anything, so I don't have to worry about the cut stump application. That method, that high volume method, I've used it in a ton of different places, and it works so good. It's like and it's part of it is that surfactant. If you're not using a strong enough surfactant, you're gonna get a mistreatment, and I think that's where it shows up, like glyphosate resistance. I think if you're not getting the herbicide into that plant on the first try in an effective way, I think you risk having some sort of alteration in that plant's, ability to like not die from that same herbicide later. And if you're not using that wetland approved herbicide, all of this stuff about like banning glyphosate and getting rid of it, I think it makes sense in the industrial marketplace to do that. But for forestry, like I'm afraid for that to happen because I don't know what I would use then. Like, what is the alternative to that? And there's all kinds of herbicides out there, or wherever, you guys get yours from, or I get mine from, like they're salespeople. They're trying to sell you on the newest thing that comes out. It's kind of like pharmaceuticals, right? And I just want to have that wetland approved herbicide. That's all I care about. That's what I need because I know it's effective. I've done a lot of things with it, and I know that it doesn't has no soil activity. You know that because you see, first of all, other invasive plants germinating in the soil, right? And other native plants coming back. So I really need leaves on the plant to kill anything effectively with a glyphosate product. There are other things you could spray, like a Mazapir, that I haven't used. I used the Mazapir once at one job, and it was completely flash killed like everything else in the area. And that's because it translocates in water and through root systems. So if you don't know like how to use these things effectively, you run the risk of, and that's why this argument about banning glyphosate is like, fingernails on a chalkboard for me, because I'm just afraid of what the alternative to that would be.
I don't think it's gonna happen.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
It's way too much money involved with that for it to be gone.
Which is unfortunate. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with a bigger problem in general is, we tend to overdo things a lot, right? Or it's like, oh, we've discovered this new chemical and now we have these genetically altered crops. Like, oh, it's so much easier and more efficient to produce this food. Let's just go all in on this instead of, thinking of other alternatives. But I mean, as is true with anything, the dose is either a medicine or a poison at the end of the day, right? And that's obviously the issue with glyphosate and how that's building up throughout the systems is from that constant use. I mean, you're talking heavy applications multiple times a year versus, the forestry application where, like you said, maybe once every few years and at a significantly reduced rate. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head what the percent solution is that they use for gly on row crops. It's way up there. I mean, probably 10 times the amount that you're using.
I don't know either. I mean, I would imagine corn dies pretty. I don't know how glyphosate resistant they are, plus they're probably putting other things on there, like the glyphosate's just killing the weeds underneath the corn. They're also putting other shit on that stuff that's like killing fungus or insects, and insecticides scare me a lot.
Yeah,
that because we don't, glyphosate really works in a very particular way, and these are called modes of action. Things like glyphosate interrupt the way a plant makes its amino acids. So we can't make our own amino acids. We don't have that pathway in our system. So plants do, and animals that eat plants, like we would eat, a cow or something like that, we can process amino acids that they've processed by eating plants. So, the amount of glyphosate that we're like putting into a forestry setting, or that, I would be exposed to doing this type of work, is not going to affect us. The thing that's because I'm not eating it, right? It's like, it's on my chemically gloved hand, or it's on my shirt or something like that. But once you put it into our food system, that's where it gets scary, because there are things probably in our gut that are going to have a problem, with that type of chemical. But outwardly from the outside, glyphosate does not pose a threat to anything other than really a plant that's getting it sprayed on them with a foliar solution.
What are your thoughts on glyphosate recently being patented as an antibiotic?
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
as an antibiotic.
Yeah, I think Taylor, you can back me up on this. Was it Bayer?
Jesus.
I think it might have been Bayer that actually just recently
it.
did that. And I think it kind of comes back to what you're saying, though. It can affect that biology in your stomach, at a biotic or antibiotic level, or it's where I'm looking for here, the microbial level. Yeah. Yep, exactly. So, they see that with bees somewhat too, where they're transferring that stuff in the hive and causing other issues there. But and I'm not trying to obviously single out the negative sides of things, because again, it all comes down to the dosage and how often it's used, right? It's like, you can use this as a tool, right? If you have a hammer and you need to pound nails, it's a great tool. Well, if you have a hammer and you're trying to change a light bulb, it's not a real great tool, right? And that's I think the problem. And that's it's a big problem that I see dealing with hunters and recreational properties is, you talked about, you can go to this database and look up the people that are registered or licensed to be chemical applicators. They log all that stuff. Well, there's an army of people in this country that are applying chemicals that are not chemical applicators. And that's where my argument comes in, that they're probably far worse than even the ag industry, because they're not using, technically precise equipment to apply stuff. They're not really measuring. They're just like, I'll err on the side of hot because I only want to do this one time. I want to make sure I kill everything. So,
which is a terrible idea, by the way.
Yes.
Because if you smoke all, you could apply a 50-50 mix as a foliar treatment, but you're just going to smoke all the leaves off the tree and nothing's going to get into that root system. So it's a waste.
Because it kills it so fast, or it just defoliates.
Yeah, just defoliates.
In 2010, Thomas's favorite company, Monsanto, was awarded a patent for glyphosate as an antibiotic.
That's great.
Interesting.
You're always rooting for Monsanto.
Yeah, always.
Yeah. I don't ever want to be like grouped into the category that's like, advocating for these huge industrial chemical companies. Like, I definitely don't feel any like attachment to them, although I do understand the ecological need for a chemical approach to certain things, especially in a time when everything is tenuous and we have a lot of invasive plants in our ecosystems, and there's not really, there's things that are getting done about it, but I think there's a disconnect, and this is what we started this with, right? The human disconnect between nature and how imperative our native ecosystems are to all of the things that we like and we really need and want. And like, letting invasive plants take over those things is basically, and this is the other thing that I like tell the people that I talk to all the time, is you got to think about your native ecosystem like the supermarket that you go into to shop at for food. If you do that, you go in there, there's all kinds of choices, hundreds of them. But now what's going to happen is, if you let invasive plants take over, wildlife can go into the woods, and it's like a native intact ecosystem is like all kinds of stuff, right? If you let invasives take over, now all of a sudden you're down to like 7 choices. And they're all like McDonald's, they're all like fast food, right? They're all going to give you the shits, and you're not going to really enjoy it, and it's not very nutritious for you, but it's there. like that's not the world that I want to live in. So I
No.
would much rather get rid of those invasives, get the natives growing back into trying to keep that system intact and encourage more wildlife to be there, because that's what they need. And like, we need them to be like enjoying and living in proper, habitat. It's
So
I
so
think
what
you
you're
I think you
saying,
make the best argument for the continued use of herbicide.
yeah. Yeah, I mean that we
It's
have
the
to do
most
something.
logical, yeah, it's the most logical reason. Like at my farm, I've had a jug of Buccaneer Plus for 3 years, and the only time I've ever used it is on buckthorn stumps. So I haven't used it in a year and a half, but that has been the one I guess rule that I would break to use it for. And it falls under, like, if I'm going to use herbicide or chemical, then there needs to be a perennial planting following that lasts a long time, or a good reason, for the next 10 years that area needs that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the importance of natives is huge, right? The big thing that I try to get my clients to understand, because I'm sure you've been in this situation before. You can walk the woods with them and you start pointing out plants, and at first they're very intrigued, and then 10 minutes later it's like they're trying to drink through a fire hose, right? You're just like, all this information you're throwing at them, they get overwhelmed. So I always try to just give them those key points, right? Like, don't overthink it, right? Native is the best way to go all around. There's lots of great, well, I shouldn't say lots, but there's a couple good AI photo apps out there where someone could pay $30 and take a picture and it'll tell them what it is. They're significantly more accurate today than they were even a year or two ago.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, I just tell them, monocultures are bad, right? Anywhere in nature, monocultures don't really exist. These natives that are being choked out and overrun with invasives, now you're starting to see monocultures, which is obviously not natural. And that the analogy that you use is spot on. I frequently use the junk food analogy because people will say, oh, I like that bush because it has berries and the birds seem to love it. Like, they absolutely will eat them, and then they fly 50 yards and they puke or they shit and they spread the seed, and it's not beneficial for them by any means. So that's spot on. And the grocery store thing is that's spot on too. So basically what you're saying is, if we don't get a handle on our invasives or the World Economic Forum, we're going to have very few food options in the grocery store in the coming future.
I mean, that will be the cascade that eventually hits us, but like, it's going to hit our wildlife and stuff first. And we already see it happening. I mean, there's already, like, I live in the middle of nowhere, so I see bears and stuff a lot, but I'm sure 50 years ago they saw a lot more of them, or 100 years ago they saw a lot more of them. Like, and we have deer is one that's sort of like, going up and up and up, and I wonder when that's going to crash. Turkeys have recently come back, within the past while. Like, we've gotten those back into this area. I think they're probably from out your way more.
Well, we're actually seeing the
decline.
We're seeing the decline. Our area hit its peak.
Yeah. Interesting. And there's that's a whole nother conversation. I mean, I think our turkey population it's dropping. I think steadily dropping, and I think it's largely in part to habitat loss, right? Destruction of habitat. Every time corn prices or bean prices go up, that farmer that hasn't farmed in how many years clears more ground. And obviously what are we down to? Less than 1% of our grasslands in this country are still remaining. And then on top of that, you combine the habitat loss with the increased amount of nest predators because of all the ag fields. So we have the food to support massive raccoon populations. No one traps them because there's no money in that market anymore. The fur population's declining.
Yeah,
which is funny side note. I saw some post the other day. I don't know how that random stuff pops up on your Instagram when you're scrolling, but I saw someone posted or was commenting on a post from Rihanna, post Super Bowl, but she was wearing a fur coat, and it was, of course, all these vegans were attacking her, and I had to comment. I was just like, if those furs were ethically trapped as part of a wildlife management
Yeah.
system, then they're far better for the environment than any synthetic counterpart.
Sure.
But that's a side note. But yeah, so our turkey population is going down, and then you combine the predators, the habitat loss, and then I think a lot of it, I think there needs to be more research done along this side, but I think there's some issues with the seed coatings that are used in egg fields, those neonic seed coatings. There's been some research, we know turkeys, they'll follow a corn planter right down the row 10 minutes after it leaves the field and just pick out every kernel of corn. And we know that can screw up stuff in their system as well. So, I mean, it's a pesticide and a fungicide mixed together and a seed coating on the seed. So
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes, our turkey population is going downhill. But across the board, we have to do something and pay more attention to it. And to your point, this disconnection with nature is that, we have a population of people in this country that do really care. And and when you split that population in half, there's a bunch that really care but don't do anything about it, right? And then there's another half that want to do something about it but don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the audience, that we're hopefully hitting with this podcast. It's like trying to inform them of these things and at least get their wheels spinning. To kind of circle back on the herbicide application, that's something that I just strongly recommend people to hire someone to do that. Like you said, you get a good qualified applicator in there, and they don't, like, if they use too much herbicide, they lose money. That's part of it, but they also understand the efficacy of it and their health and the environmental health versus, just a weekend management type situation where you're trying to get as much done. And not saying that's bad, but again, those people should be more educated than just thinking they can go pick up a bottle of poison off the store shelf and go spray it on some stuff and see results.
Yeah. And I don't know if you guys have ever talked about like NRCS on your program, Natural Resource Conservation Service, but if you have X amount of acres, you can get funding to do invasive control work on your property, and they will, pretty much pay for the whole thing. And they will also have recommendations for contractors. So you should be able to go to your state NRCS office and be like, hey, who are the contractors that do this type of work? Because I'm on that list. They know who I am. So like they'll be able to say like, oh, this person's pretty good. They, I know they use the right herbicides. And that's something as a landowner, you want to ask your contractor, what herbicide are you using? And if they're not saying like, hey, I'm using a wetland approved herbicide, I would, if I had 25 acres and I was hiring someone, I would totally tell them what to do.
Yeah.
Well, I would say use a wetland approved herbicide everywhere. And I want you to do this type of application here because these plants I like. Most of the people who do invasive control work are not geared towards the botanical aspect of it, like really knowing what they're looking at underneath all of these invasive plants. And so if you can get somebody who really knows what they're doing, you can get a really good treatment for a really good price, and get ahead of your invasive problem and then create that wildlife habitat that you want on your property.
Agreed. Yeah. NRCS can be a really good tool. I think we have that here in this. I mean, it's county by county here. Yeah. So find the county extension office, but yeah.
Yeah. Agreed. I mean,
have you gone across state lines with those programs?
Yeah. I work for NRCS in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Vermont, but they not only invasive control, they do, and they pay you per acre, like 200 for light, 350 for medium, 650 for heavy. That's a lot of money. But they'll build you woods roads. They'll pay for your forest management plan.
They'll pay for your fencing. Right,
pay Taylor. For there's a deer fencing thing. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. You could get timber stand improvement, crop tree release, mass tree release, all of that stuff. Like, you're gonna have to you have enough acres that you're gonna have to put a little money into managing it, but like they're there to help you do that.
Yes. I think pretty much anything. I think the biggest issue with NRCS is the inconsistency between offices. And then some
timing,
programs, some
government leg.
yeah, timing take.
the government aspect of it.
Yeah. I mean, you are a year out before you do anything. I guess for farming stuff, it's like 18 months before you can even do anything. What is it like for the forestry stuff? Is it like 12 months?
So I'm on the side of, I've seen things take, sometimes they're not as long, but you need to get in by a deadline to get your application reviewed. If you have more practices in there, so if it's not just invasive control, if it's invasive control, TSI, pollinator planting, and something else, all of those 4 practices are going to rank your property higher than other people's. If you touch another property that has also had NRCS control work done at some point, your property then again gets ranked higher. So like you have to take a few of those things into consideration about the timing. But if you're thinking about doing invasive control, like start it in the wintertime or the late fall, start planning that, and then maybe by the first round of funding, which comes out in like June or July, you make the cut and you're funded for, maybe your contractor can get to you that season, but if not, it's going to be the next season. And then you're in that 10-year management plan cycle. So like at least you're getting to it at some point. It's better than not doing anything.
No, that's a great point. And I'll say I've had pretty good relationships with the NRCS. It's just they take time, and
they're all really cool, laid back people, and like they're just trying to do the right thing and help some people do the right thing. So sometimes they don't have the people like us can help them just like sort of contextualize what they're trying to do and like help steer their management approaches in different ways. That all helps because they're not necessarily like in the field for the past while actually doing this work. They're a soil conservation scientist, and I don't mean to talk bad about it. I'm sure some of them have done the work, but like for the most part, it's like an applied experiential thing that a lot of us have that we should be sharing with them so that they can like share that with all of their landowners, because they're the ones that really have the reach on it.
Well, there's a lot of them that are just textbook teachers.
Yeah.
They went to college, they got hired out of college and haven't done very many, programs themselves, but
they definitely appreciate working with boots on the ground people. I mean, I've had a lot of really good conversations. I've got 4 projects in the works right now with clients that are involved with NRCS, and they appreciate it. I mean, when it comes to like a CRP plan or something, they just they map out these arbitrary fields and stuff, and then we'll come in and actually put some structure and design, where we want that screening, we want to block the road, we want to create travel corridors, all these things that are more geared towards the hunting aspect of a property. But they're always open to all those suggestions. They'll do anything you want at the end of the day, and that's where I try to simplify the process for them as much, because they are very, very helpful, very helpful. All right, let's shift gears here a little bit. I think that was a lot of really, really good information, really good information. But now I want to talk just a little bit about the regenerative side of the forest, or woody shrubs. Especially a lot of people listening to this are probably coming here hoping for tips on deer habitat. And you spoke about the deer population going up where you are. It's certainly going up across the country. Whitetails, they tend to thrive in these fragmented, egg rich environments, for better or for worse. But with that in mind, the biggest obstacle that I face when it comes to, so we stripped out the invasives, now we're trying to get the natives back in there. Deer themselves, the animal that someone's paid me to help them improve their property for, they are the biggest obstacle in regenerating a forest. Do you have any tips along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not a hunter, but I understand the benefit of hunters and needing to control our deer population, because from a timber perspective, working for a forestry company, like we can't grow trees if they keep getting browsed, right? So some things that we've tried in the past are like slash walls, fencing. We've put up like 15-foot tall black fencing in the woods, like fencing out an acre. We can talk about that if you want. I had some, that was an NRCS thing that I have some, or American Forestry Foundation work that was funded that I had some points on that probably I would have done better. Planting with tubes, and just putting up, letting people hunt on your property.
Yeah, reducing the population
Yeah.
is critical. One of the biggest issues I think throughout the hunting community, honestly, is the concept of herd management, where some people understand it, some people don't. Everyone loves to see deer, especially a deer hunter, right? Who doesn't want what predator doesn't want a game rich environment? But there's this hard concept or hard pill to swallow for a lot of guys where they need to reduce their doe population specifically and balance out that herd sex ratio, and that's a big problem. I mean, even on our own farm where I hunt, I can't kill enough does. I was just checking trail cameras the other day, and there's a sequence of photos where there's like 30 does in the background, which is not what I want to see. It's just that we have a lot of food on that property, especially late season. Those deer start to kind of yard up. The tubing, I've found the tubing to be, definitely effective when you're targeting. That another issue with that, or really the only issue with that, is the cost of it. Where obviously if you're trying to regenerate a bigger area, paying for each one of those individual tubes, which a lot of times are equal to or greater than the value of the tree or shrub that you're planting to begin with. But I mean, that's probably more cost effective than fencing off an acre with a 15-foot tall fence, I would think.
Yeah, no, I mean that's an experiment. They were trying to figure out what the cost of that was and how much time it would take to actually do. I don't think it's going to work, because they should have patch cut the whole thing first. We should have knocked down all the trees in that acre and then fenced it, because now it's too shaded to really have anything like successfully regenerate. We have a lot of natural regeneration here. You could just favor species that the deer don't like black birch, right? We have a ton of black birch. I don't know if you guys have that there.
I don't think we do. I mean, I'm not real good at identifying separate birch species. I think we have more yellow birch in this area.
So it has that methyl salicylate in the bark, just like yellow birch does, but it's stronger.
Okay.
It's like what they used to make root beer out of.
Okay.
Like that root beer concentrate. So they would distill the bark, pull that like essential oil off, and then put that into concentrate for root beer. So it's like sassafras and methyl salicylate from black birch.
Interesting.
But black birch is not favored by deer. So we have a ton of stands that have been either, clear cut or shelter wood harvested, and it's tons of black birch coming back. And they're all, over your head, thick. You can barely walk through it. It's so thick.
Is there any other value to black birch?
Yeah, black birch. I mean, you get saw logs out of it. It's good firewood. You can tap them. The tapping season is like right after maple season. So you could have an extended, with climate change, like you might want to have some other species that we can. Maples are on their way out, I think, too. Definitely a species in decline. So having black birch to like take some of that up. It's not as sweet. It's more like a cooking oil. And there's not a lot of people doing it. It's like I think there's one company out of Alaska that actually taps black birch. But it's a really solid tree. It's like good for habitat, all kinds of things.
Interesting. Yeah, I've never thought about it that way. Why do you think maples are on their way out?
Just in the past, we've been having a lot of maples, like a sugar maple anyway. Red maple is probably like our most dominant tree, but sugar maple is really cold dependent, and we need a lot of snowpack to sort of like insulate the root systems of those trees. They're very sensitive, And so we haven't been having that. We barely had any snow this winter. And, you know, maybe in the past 5 or 6 years, we've had one winter that's really been like solid snowpack, and like people are snowmobiling and snowshoeing and cross country skiing and all that stuff. And like there was enough snow that it lasted through April, but not this year. So, and there's also, if you pay attention to like influxes of insect diseases, the state will fly over different tracts of like forest land and take pictures of the amount of insect infestation in different areas, and you can tell from aerial photographs what species those trees are, right? Huge decimation of sugar maples. Oaks have been having a hard time. It's kind of depressing to go to these like forest health meetings sometimes in the spring. It's like, you know, they might as well give you a gun when you walk in the door, because it's like that bad. Like, what is going to happen to our forests? You know, and you hope that there's some like resiliency and genetic reservoir that is, you know, going to potentially come back, and some of those seeds. So like regeneration is really important, right? We have a lot of forest in our state, in this part of this country, 80% forest. So we like diversifying our forest is something we should be doing. And that's through, you know, choosing the right site to like take down 20 acres and like restart that forest over. Or finding an aspen stand that's like mature aspen that really isn't fulfilling as much ecologically as it could be if it was all resprouts, right? If we knocked that all down and like gave it woodcock habitat and, you know, grouse habitat, like all this stuff, and diversify, create this mosaic, and hopefully like bring enough species in here that we might be able to get over this hurdle of ecological instability. But that's like, you know, maybe we'll do that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, you know, when it comes to trees, there's this big disconnect between humans and the actual timeline of trees, right? It's like we think of everything in our lifetimes, you know, that 70, 80 year generational gap. But the lifetime and the successions of these trees and these tree species and how, you know, some of them are there for a long, long time and some kind of ebb and flow, exactly like you're saying. And but you're spot on. I mean, this is what I see all the time and conversations I have with every single client. And, you know, the oak thing is very concerning to me because most of the properties I'm on, unfortunately, a lot of them have already been logged.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, what do? Well, you know, and I'm not trying to point fingers or throw mud at any industry or individual by any means, but, you know, someone wants a logger on their property and they only have a 20-acre property, that logger's not going to show up unless he can take enough trees to cover his time. And unfortunately, that means they're taking all the big healthy oaks. Well, then you go back to the overpopulation of deer issue and they can't get any oak regeneration. And if they, you know, luckily a lot of those guys hire someone like me or even a state forester to come in and take a look and be like, hey, back to the invasive issue, we need to get a handle on that. But in situations where they don't do that, it gets out of hand real fast, you know, and that's, I guess at the end of the day, management, whatever level it may be, is critical, right? I mean, I think we can all agree that we're beyond the point of letting things just go rogue or do their own thing. I mean, maybe you get a couple spots in some of those big wilderness areas out west, but even then, if we're suppressing fires in those areas, you know, we're going to deal with issues there at some point, or I should say that forest ecosystem is going to deal with issues at some point.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing with that 20-acre landowner is really, if you can even call it management, maybe you call it mismanagement, but that's, you know, that's what we've experienced, and not in our lifetime, but before us. And that's why we're sort of in the forest management situation that we're in right now, is because there was that like lots of pasture land with livestock regenerated, and then, you know, it was let regenerate for a while. Those sort of old farms were taken over, so we lost sort of some of our more open habitat. Forest came back, then it was cherry picked, right? And so those nice trees, they would just go in and take those nice trees out, and that's where the money was. So there was this idea that logging made you money for a long time. Like, I made $20,000 logging my property. Well, now we're in the part of the the world where that doesn't happen. You might have to pay 20 grand to actually do the right ecological management logging on your property. And you're not going to make money, because we're going to actually leave those nice trees because they're genetically better than anything else that's here. They provide some sort of food for wildlife, and we need seed source to grow a forest again into something that we want. And so like, I'm never going to see the culmination of that in my lifetime. I'm doing these things that I know I will never have any I will never benefit from that directly after me actually getting a paycheck from doing my work, right?
Yeah. Well, we're thankful for people like you, right? I mean, that's kind of my same mindset too. It's like I don't think of it as far as me. I think of it as, the next generation, couple generations down the road. And yeah, everything you're saying, spot on. All these timber stands that have been high graded over and over and over again. And that's when I think about right now, the big boom is, the emerald ash borer. Do you guys have a lot of ash trees out in the east? So everyone's killing and logging every ash tree they possibly can right now, whether it's toothpick size or actually has some saw log value to it. But my concern with that is, are we going to hit the same issue that we hit with the American chestnut, where, that blight hit, but then the government ordered the logging of all the chestnuts. So we never gave that species an opportunity to express resistance to that blight. Right. And who knows what would have been out there. Maybe it wouldn't have mattered. Maybe it does. But, with these ash trees too, it's like, and for anyone listening, it's different if you have some bigger saw logs out there, then it's usually advantageous to get them out anyways, because you're going to open up the canopy right away. You get a little bit of money for them and start regenerating right away. But, we've got some timber stands on our property where there's not an ash tree in there over 6 inches in diameter, and they're all, slowly dying off. And hopefully at some point we find some resistance to this ash borer.
Are they in open habitat, or are they in the understory?
They're in the understory.
Okay. So that ash has a really interesting like life requirement, right? They want shade in the beginning, but then they want full open canopy. So like in that situation that you're describing, if I was walking into that, I would say, let's patch this off, right? A shelter wood is you're basically leaving seed trees or something a little bit shady for the trees underneath, but you got to take the top off at some point to let that thing fully realize
express,
right? And ash is one of those that will go away if it doesn't have the right light requirement at the certain time of its cycle. So I don't know how tall those are, but that might be a situation where you want to either, if they're not nice trees, girdle the ones around them or knock them down and just open up some more light and let them take off in there.
It's ironic you say that, because this particular timber stand I'm thinking of is probably 50-50 sugar maple and ash. So which one do you want me to kill?
Yeah.
You have to
normally
decide.
People would choose the sugar maples over the ash trees.
Yeah.
Out here we don't. I mean, it's here. I've done EAB treatments, like chemical injection systems for, we sex the trees first to make sure that we have, because they're dioecious. So male and female, they can be in between too, right? Sort of like a hermaphrodite. But male and female on different trees. So we want to make sure we have one male for every 5-6 females within the range that their pollen can travel. Sex those out, and then we've been treating them to sort of have a component of resistance, hopefully, if that ever really wipes us out. I've seen pictures of Ohio and different places that just look completely decimated. And really we talk about white ash because that's our timber species, but we also have black and green ash. And those are both historically for indigenous peoples very important species for basket making. And so not only are we risking losing our timber species, we're also risking losing part of our natural heritage through losing these other species. And I think they actually I read the other day that EAB actually Green ash is on the bottom of its list, which is good. But we haven't seen too much of it up here. But the management approach right now is like, if you have sawlog sized ash trees, take them
out.
because it's really not going to get better for those. And then anything else that's sort of under that, we're leaving at this time. There was that a few years ago, there was that like, if you got them, cut them mentality. And we really like listened and thought about it and was like, I don't really want huge swaths of no ash trees in my woods. But the other side of that is where I do see them. I mean, there's a ton of regen coming back, like ash trees that are small, in the understory that are 18 inches tall.
Can I ask how you sex those trees? Do you have to wait until summertime when they're actually producing?
No, so they have visually different male and female flowers. So the males, they kind of have a purple tinge to them. And if I remember correctly, they're a little shorter than the female flowers. You can sex them. I usually do it in the spring because that's the time when I'm doing the EAB treatment, because you want to be putting that stuff up into the canopy, right, into the leaves where the larva is going to feed. But if you had, if I had enough time, you could do it in the fall, and you go out and I bring a pair of binoculars.
That's what I was going to ask too. You're scoping up in the canopy.
Yeah, you look up, and it's a lot easier to see females in the fall because you'll see fruit on them, but you run the risk of either potentially seeing a tree that didn't fruit at all. So you don't know if it's male or female. It could be either one. And sometimes you just have to guess, or you move on to the next tree where you can actually find them within the area that you're trying to find males and females. But in the spring is generally when I do it. But the other way to do it, if you can't see anything up there, if there's one ash tree, right, you can just be observant and just look on the ground and look for seeds. So if you're finding ash seeds and it's the only tree around you,
then it must be a female. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I've never really thought about that. I mean, you think about that all the time with other plants or with other trees, but with the ash tree specifically, when you're not thinking of a tree that produces like a very obvious fruit or seed, I think a lot of times we kind of overlook that. So, that's good. That's interesting information for sure. One of the big questions that I wanted to present to you, this goes back. We've kind of touched on a lot of this. The importance of natives, the problems with exotics. There's a couple of things. Right before we got on this call, I was putting together a plan on a property, and one of the key issues on this property is not really habitat related. It's neighboring pressure related, hunting pressure. So we're going to put in a conifer screen to kind of isolate the side of the property. And it's very popular in the hunting community to plant Norway spruce. Mm-hmm. Now, I tend to push towards more native trees. I like the white pines. They grow quickly, but they self-prune, so you lose that screening capacity down the road. White spruce are kind of in between, and then you have black spruce, and they're significantly slower growing. But do you have anything to add to that as far as potential trade-offs for putting in Norway spruce? Is it close enough to a white or a black spruce that it would provide the same benefits that these native trees provide? Because obviously, if it's a native plant, some native insect is utilizing that plant at some stage in its life, right? And therefore the native birds benefit from it, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. I would always err on the side of trying to plant as native as possible. Norways have historically been planted in my area for a long time. There's a stand in Green Mountain National Forest, just behind my house. There's a stand of Norway spruce. I do find small ones too, like 6 feet tall. So they're reproducing. I don't think of them as invasive. I don't think of them as non-native. As like a bad non-native or a naturalized thing, right? I think of it as something the CCC did back in whenever they were doing that, like the 40s or something, they planted this stuff because it grew fast. They used it for particular, applications. I think around here they used it for transporting marble for the crates because it wouldn't stain the marble.
Interesting.
And so, to answer your question, I would try to pick something that made a screen that was native. And I don't know, you guys have problems with hemlock woolly adelgid there?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So hemlocks can hold their lower branches like that, and create that screen. Another one I would think of is like cedar. You guys have cedar up there?
Yep. Yep.
So that would be another one that's a native that might fill that niche. I would always, I think, try to plant as native as I can and from an eco region as close to where I am as I can. Because those plants are going to be more well adapted to deal with the area that I put them in because they've sort of evolved there, So Norway, I mean, if you were, if you had a client that was like, I just want to grow timber really fast and have, and I want to do it, and he was really strong-armed about it, I'd probably be like, well, let's do half Norway and half something else. Like,
is there a big difference? I mean, there's obviously differences, but is there much of a difference between Norway spruce and a white spruce aside from the growth rate and maybe how they fill out over time? Is that really the key differences?
I'm not familiar with white spruce in New England anyway. We have red and black, and red spruce, they can grow pretty quick. I mean, so I can't speak to white spruce growth habits over Norway. But in a mixed setting, we have this type of forest, red spruce, balsam fir. So and then there's a hardwood component to that. That's usually a smaller part of it. But both of those species grow really rapidly, where there's enough sunlight to do it. So usually I see that happening in like with a shelter wood cut. So you'd probably have bigger pines overtopping those that will eventually get taken off to really release that understory, which is now 7-8 feet tall. But maybe it takes 10-15 years to get there after an initial and that's natural regen, that's not planting. So if you're planting decently sized seedlings into the ground, you can probably cut that time by 3 or 4 years, something like that.
What about hybrid plants, like hybrid willows, even hybrid chestnuts, stuff like that?
That's really interesting because you get into like nativar is a really it's like a hot term right now, nativar. In nature, like plants will hybridize on their own, and so, but historically it's rare to have something persist that's a hybrid as well as your single
original
did. Yeah. So from my perspective, you see a lot of that in the horticultural trade, hybrids of all kinds, and it's just like that pharmaceutical thing that we were talking about. They're like salespeople, they're trying to sell you something new, and it's cool. I worry about pollinators being able to recognize things like that, because we see them as a macro plant and we're like, oh, this flower's red, but like the pollinator might not be paying attention to that, and it's actually like the really finely detailed lip that was on that flower that's what attracted the pollinator to it, and that's how it could use its resources. So if now we're changing what that flower looks like, are we confusing pollinators in other ways? Also, is the pollen in that hybrid effectively
useless?
No, I mean like affecting our other native populations of plants by causing them to be, less resilient to potential changes in climate, because now we're altering their genetic makeup down the line. So I don't know the right answer. These are
Yeah.
things that I just think about. And I try to get as like that ecotype thing with native plants and seeds, try to get them from as close to you as possible. I think generally I think of like 2 hours in any direction from me is sort of like my eco region. And they probably have, you can probably look up maps of your state and find out what exactly your eco region is if you key that into Google. But I have obviously people out there that send me seeds, or I have sort of trade deals with, and I just, I'm aware of where they're coming from and I know what ecotype it is roughly. So I try not to alter too many things on my own property by bringing in hybrids.
Yeah, my concerns are the same, especially after we just got done talking about oaks and the issue there, and how valuable they are to the native insects and the native birds and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I guess I wasn't looking for a silver bullet answer by any means, but just definitely wanted to
But
get your opinion on it.
but chestnuts, I mean, I am on board with chestnut hybridization and trying to bring that tree back into our landscape. The amount of like habitat, I just can't imagine in my head how much wildlife there used to be when we had full-on chestnut forests, and all of that mast we lost out of our woods. Like, what did that do to our ecosystem? It was a huge loss for us, but bringing that back through crossbreeding and back crossing to that resistant chestnut tree, I think we definitely need to do that, and we're probably going to have to figure out how to make that work in a shorter amount of time. And because it's hard, right, with generations of trees, you have to let them grow for a certain time, and then they have to be able to fruit. It takes time for those trees to mature, to grow seeds. So like, we're going to end up having to do that with other species within our lifetime probably, and ash might be one of them, hemlock might be one of them, because of the amount of travel that we have today, the frequency of travel from other places, and the influx of invasive species of not only plants but insects and fungus and stuff.
Yeah, we need to speed up evolution a little bit, right?
Yeah, on our own term, and figure out how to make that work.
Yeah, because obviously they're not gonna do much by way of limiting trade or shutting down these landscaping companies that are still selling a lot of these exotic invasives.
What they should do is just shut down the NASA program and start funding like serious ecological restoration programs.
That would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? Protect
Yeah,
the
because
planet we're on.
yeah, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely would. One last plant that I wanted to touch on, and this one is probably gonna I'm probably gonna get some heat on this one. Taylor probably knows what I'm talking about. Uh, this is big in the whitetail property. I don't even want to call that an industry, but the people that have whitetail properties that they're designing. So a key component of that, you're not a hunter, so I'll kind of summarize in a nutshell, right? So if you have a hunting property, at least this is how I educate my clients. At the end of the day, pressure is what limits potential on your property. So if you're spooking deer,
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna you're gonna hold a lot of deer still potentially, because those does and those fawns and those smaller bucks will tolerate that. But the bucks that people are willing to spend the money to improve their property for, those big, mature, older age class bucks, they won't tolerate human pressure, a lot of pressures in general. In fact, they don't even really like to tolerate doe pressure, that herd social pressure that comes with too many does.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to having a good, high quality hunting property, you have to do everything you can to limit the pressure on that property. And if you want to hunt that property effectively, you have to make sure that the path that you are taking to get to and from your stand locations is obscure. You need to be able to hide yourself so those deer are not aware of your presence. Giant miscanthus grass
Mm-hmm.
has been a very popular thing that's being planted, and it's being sold by a few brands, a few companies within the outdoor industry. Now, my personal take on this is very similar to everything that we just talked about, right? That plant, these people selling this claim that it's never going to spread. It spreads in the same breath, they'll say that it spreads slowly and fills out through the rhizomes of the roots, right? But I guess at this point, they don't think it will ever produce seeds. But for me, again, I always look at it as that plant is still taking up space that a native plant could be utilizing, and that native plant is going to benefit the native ecosystems. And especially grasses, how important grasses are for those pollinators really early in the season and everything. I wanted to get your take on that from a perspective completely unrelated to hunting.
Yeah.
Right. Because where I see this going, and this is a big reason for this podcast, and really the core of my business and why I'm doing what I do, is because at this point, there are very few private landowners out there willing to spend the money on their property to improve it unless they're going to get some benefit from it. And hunters, the hunting community, is a large community of people, relatively speaking, that's willing to improve their habitat on their property. And what I don't want to see happen is, in time, all of these private landowners that have these hunting properties that are the last native habitats around, I don't want them to be converted to a habitat full of these exotics just for these relatively small benefits that we get, and they're not benefiting the local wildlife in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Miscanthus is, unfortunately, it's sort of having like a moment, and it's been picked up by, I didn't realize that people were doing it to like shield themselves as almost like a blind, right? That's what you're describing, going into their hunting stand.
Correct. Yep. They'll do long corridors. So, if you envision a small food plot or a small field that, we're trying to encourage deer to feed on.
Yeah.
So then they'll screen a whole edge of it so they can walk past that field to and from that stand location, in a nutshell.
And, there's a lot of landscapers that are like using this in their landscaping of properties. And I'm not sure if it's because it's one of those things like somebody else sees it, it's getting like promoted in some sort of landscaping magazine somewhere, and like people are telling their landscapers that they want it, or the landscapers are getting it fed to them from somewhere else, because it's been like popping up all over the place in New England. The further south you go, you do see it escaped on the roadside, all over the place. It's not being well behaved and barely spreading. It's everywhere. And so that will, with climate change, that's eventually going to happen to us up here. And I would say, to whoever, send me the names of those companies. But there are native plants that you could plant that would be beneficial for local pollinators, wildlife. You can probably get what you want out of it. It's not going to be the home and garden version of your shielded walkway to your stand, but it'll at least be better than putting an invasive plant into your property.
Are some of those species, would you say, blue stem, little and big?
Well, what you're describing with silvergrass is like a 4, 5, 6 foot tall something, right? The blue stems really won't get that tall. Like little blue stem is going to get up to my knee, maybe. Gotcha. So I'm thinking of something like, depending on, and it's going to depend on your habitat, what species you can put in that would grow that tall. But like down south, there are native species of bamboo. They're called river cane. And so those things will grow. Like there's one called giant river cane. It'll grow like 6 or 7, 8 feet tall. So if somebody was down in North Carolina or Georgia, that's a native plant you can put in that will do what you want it to, and it'll benefit your habitat. Those would be more of like a riparian area planting, right? Up here, you could do something like cattail. Now we have 2 species of cattail. Typha is the genus on that. One of them is non-native. The other one is native. So you want to make sure you have the native cattail, but those grow really easily.
They would require
wetter
wet
areas.
soil. Yeah.
Yep. There's a native species of Phragmites. There's the invasive one that is terrible, but we do have a native species of Phragmites. I don't know it's rare in my area or uncommon, so I don't know how complicated it would be to actually source that. But then another one, are there leaves on the trees, or is it like year-round coverage that you're looking for?
No,
Can
I
they
mean
be
primarily it'd
deciduous?
be in the fall, so it has to stand. That's the thing is like
Okay.
a lot of people do plant hybrid willows and stuff that grow quickly, and then you can coppice those and get them to hedge out or bush out. But
Yep.
once the leaves drop, then you lose a lot of that visual screen. I mean, another very popular screening plant is switchgrass, which I kind of go back and forth on that. It's kind of the same thing where switchgrass in a more of a native type setting, it's a perennial bunch grass, but you can plant that at a higher density and it functions fairly well as a screen. But now actually ironically the same company that pushes the miscanthus, they promote bedding areas where it's a giant monoculture of switchgrass with structures of miscanthus planted in it. So there's lots of argument there, and I think switchgrass, that's generally what I prescribe for that type of situation. Switchgrass for more of the quick short-term screening, but we're talking planting like a 10-foot wide swath of that along the edge of a field. The conifers are more of a long-term, but conifers have a trade-off too, because once they mature and they get too tall, now all of a sudden they're blocking all the sunlight hitting that field from, it just depends on what side of the field you're trying to screen. But so there's all sorts of trade-offs, obviously.
What about something like pokeweed? You know that one?
Yeah, very familiar with pokeweed, but that kind of, I mean, I think there's a place for that for sure. That's going to obviously dry up and fall apart, but that stays green pretty late into the fall.
Well, I was thinking like, until snow falls, those things they stay up. So it's kind of like it would break up your visual barrier.
Yep.
So you're not going to have a solid wall of something there. You're not going to be completely invisible, but you want to like break up your approach. So it's not as easy to see. You don't stand out like a sore thumb. You're like kind
Correct.
of getting to your spot.
Well, I think the answer really is a combination of things, right? Because that pokeweed's going to provide pretty good cover at 5 feet off the ground, and if you have maybe some shorter grasses underneath that, it kind of mixes up. But again, that's really at the end of the day, that's a perfect solution. I shouldn't say perfect, but that's a better solution where you have a diverse planting instead of a monoculture planting there, because now you have all this wildlife. And that's typically what I do is I prescribe planting the switchgrass, and then we'll come through and we'll actually plug some shrubs in there and get some woody structure. And that way, when that switchgrass gets wet or wet snow falls on it, you have that structure that helps hold it up, and you still have the food value, the bird value. We just, we would we would plant shrubs that are not as attractive to deer, because we don't want to draw the deer close to that entrance and access route. But that's kind of where I go with it, I guess.
Is there any grasses that you think get that, or because I'm thinking like native rangeland? Like
that get
Indian
tall
grass
like
get that tall?
Maybe. Yeah, you're talking about for like a drier habitat.
Correct, like an upland habitat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think of anything, at least not in my area.
Yeah, you would be a lot more wet than us, most likely.
Yeah, the most of the really tall plants that I would think about like covering my access on the way into something would be in a wetter area. Like I'm trying to think about when I'm completely covered in vegetation and I'm like in a wetland probably.
Yeah.
Cattails are a good one. A lot of people talk about that in regenerative ag, trying to bring them back instead of
you
especially
can
in those
eat
low
those. They're a food
lying
source.
energy source.
Yep. There's a lot of like really good benefits. They pull heavy metals. So any sort of contaminate, we should send them to Ohio. They should get cattails.
A lot of them.
They Yeah, it's a good there's a good argument out there for them, especially in those fields that you see get flooded year after year, and they're really only pulling a crop off, like
And those, I mean, cattails are probably pretty resilient in a drier. They probably don't. You see them a lot in wetlands, but like I've seen them in drier places too, where it's not consistently wet all year. It might be perennial stream that comes through that makes a little area wet, but those plants survive. And then that will, throughout the winter, there's still that shield there because those canes stay up all year pretty much. The other one I was thinking of was like wild rice, which is a really cool plant. But you obviously need that. It needs to be like in the water, but that's for, waterfowl tend to love that plant a lot. So if you had a little wetland near you, or your access was along a wetland, planting wild rice in there would be the way to go. Because then you'd be attracting all kinds of birds.
What is your gut reaction on switchgrass? Because that is real common in hunting.
Gut reaction, like, should you do it?
Yeah, well, it is native, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you know the genus on it? Common names are a little funky sometimes.
I think it's a miscanthus. Yeah, panicum. That's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's as long as it's native, I'm into it. This does look like it gets pretty tall. I mean, if that's the alternative, I would say 100% go with switchgrass over the miscanthus.
Well, and I'm interested in your thoughts on how to mimic what we used to have on rangeland, the native grasses, where you see those pictures of those root systems that are like 15 feet down on the ground. And I mean, our area is susceptible to bad floods, and I'm not sure about yours, but if we replaced even just edges and even had terraces full of these native grasses that brought back, and then I graze cattle, and I know cattle would graze them well. Is there any grasses that you can think of like that?
Obviously from my area, like, little blue stem, big blue stem are big ones, just because we have, from our perspective, we have meadows that we, like bobolinks is a bird that historically had been here, was sort of in decline because a lot of that farmland and meadowland went away. We came back to forest. So recently there's been a movement towards having more of that little blue stem habitat for that type of bird. But in terms of like that particular habitat you're talking about, I just read about, it was a book called The Quiet Extinction. Have you read that? It takes like stories about certain particular plants, and plants are the basis of a lot of our ecosystems, and we pay very little attention to them. And they were talking about more of like where you guys are from. They were talking about bison, and they were talking about it's a kind of clover. I think it's called bison clover, but it was evolved with the use of these mammals, and they rely on disturbance. So because the bison eventually went away or hunted out, this plant suffered. So they were connected, and over time, with the bison going away, now this plant has become rare and endangered. And they describe all the rangeland grass species that come along with that. But they also talked about what you described as breaking the plains. For a long time before they got a steel, John Deere can get blamed for this, and I think it was Illinois where it started to happen first, because his production facility was there. But with use of the steel plow came the plowing of all that fertile land down there, because originally it was really hard to get through it. But as soon as we had that, things started moving, and all of that stuff got turned over. And so eventually we lost the topsoil layer that was so thick that was supporting all these native plants. So I would say from a conservationist perspective, like finding those areas that have the ability to bounce back from where they are. If you guys have that on your own property, replanting those native plants that have historically been there. So whatever, if you look on iNaturalist, or you can look through herbarium records, a lot of our herbarium specimens these days are digitalized. So you don't have to go to the university to look through a cabinet anymore. You can just Google your scientific name on the computer and a location. So for whatever county you're in or whatever part of the state you're in, you can get really specific, and you can look at the herbarium sample from 1900 from your property or the property next to yours with the plant and what it is and where it was collected. So you can like historically understand the plants that were there, and then you can go out and look at your property and say, oh, these things shouldn't be here. This is how I'm going to manage that. So I would say use that information to sort of steer how you look at your own property and what species you want to be there for your, really bison, I guess, that you have grazing your land.
Yeah, we mimic what the bison did.
Yeah.
We move them frequently, and then the area rests for a long time.
Yep.
It's good stuff. Got a lot of.
And I want to get better. I want to
do.
get more into the true native grasses, and then,
there's a ton of them. Grasses are like kryptonite for most botanists, because the botanists are really interesting people, and they're kind of weird most of the time. And then you find out who the grass botanists are, and they're like the subsection of the subsection, and they're really weird people. So like you think you're dealing with weird people, and then you find out people who like grass plants, and you're like, whoa, like you special.
Well, I noticed, so Thomas mentioned the AI app, so I use Picture This.
Yep.
What would you recommend?
I agree with what Tom said before. Like, they used to be bad. I use iNaturalist, and I haven't tried the other ones. So,
that one's awesome at everything, forbs and legumes, and it can't identify grasses.
Yeah. So,
which I know the grasses are super hard to identify, all the different ones, but
yeah, I would start grasses. Every plant that you look at when you're out in the woods or your field or whatever, if you do it enough, you start to notice things that are different. So you'll be like, oh, that looks like that grass I saw, 2 weeks ago out here at this other place, but something's different about it. And you get down and you're like, oh, these things are really long. And you're like, well, I wonder why they're so long. So you take a few pictures, take diagnostic pictures. So you want to look at what's different about that plant and what makes that plant unique. So you want to look at the leaf, the base of it, any sort of thing that's colored. If it's in fruit or flower, that's when you're really going to ID that plant the best, especially grass. So forget about doing it unless it's got something really characteristic. Forget about doing it out of flower. But there's probably
the seasons, it changes so much too.
Yeah, so like being observant is really important, and then don't feel bad if you can't figure out exactly what that grass is. Maybe you get it to genus that season, and the next season you go back and you get it while it's in flower, and you can like figure it out that way. But there are some pretty decent like this is the one for that I use in New England.
Oh, nice.
And this is from the Native Plant Trust, but they have, pretty, like here's big blue stem, pretty diagnostic photos of what you need to look at.
Can you read the title of that book, Tom?
Yeah, it's called Grasses, Sedges, and Rushes, an identification guide. It's by Lauren Brown and Ted Elliman. And so these have pictures and line drawings. So that's, that's really important when you get an ID book, is to get one with line drawings, because these are averages as opposed to a picture that's a picture of one genetic example of that plant, right? So you always want to be looking at something, and they'll usually say in it like, this is half size, or this is 1/4 size of what you'll actually be seeing when you're trying to ID a plant. But those are all, and you'll eventually get good enough, like you'll know that when you're looking at a plant that has really panicled stuff like that it's an ergrostis. And so at least when you're going out and observing this stuff, you'll be like putting them in genus categories. And then, if you're interested enough, which only a very few of us are, about finding out what that grass is, you'll be able to sit down and figure that out to species if you want to.
Yeah, that seems like a rabbit hole that I don't need to go down right now, but it's very interesting to me. It's just like
it's an insane rabbit hole. It's an insane rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I just walk around my pasture and like it's so crazy.
Yeah.
And they're hard to identify, even with
I mean, we have,
people.
Our grasslands are, at least up near us, reed canary grass is a bad one. That's
an
invasive, forms huge monocultures, really isn't good for any sort of like grassland bird or anything like that. And it's unfortunately like all over our riparian areas further up north. And you see it mixed in it, and it looks like it's hard to even notice because it just looks like it's just grass, right? It looks like every other grass, until you actually take the time to ID it. Then you're like, holy shit, this stuff's everywhere.
How do you get rid of that?
Foxtail is bad here too.
The places that I've probably treated like 100 acres of it, and we did it with like a boomless sprayer. It was a monoculture, but we had a boomless sprayer. It's kind of sat flat in the back of a UTV, and it had a bar that went all the way down and a crossbar, and then we could adjust the formulation rate or how much it would spray out, and we just lower it almost all the way to the ground, so it would be like a ground application. And then you just drive around. You have a map on your phone where you can keep tracks, and you just like grid it basically. But after one treatment, we saw native milkweeds coming back, all kinds of things, jewelweed, skullcap coming back in there, and those are like things that pollinators are going to use. They're not using that reed canary grass at all for anything. Like, it's just a bunch of garbage occupying a huge swath of property.
Yeah.
And low growing and covers the ground, right? It's kind of,
I mean, when we first treated it was probably like up to my chest.
Oh, wow.
And so we treated that late season. It's thick. It's hard to get through. Like, you can't see, there's no habitat there. It's like they can't even plant shrubs in it to have them grow because they get shaded out so quickly. So it's hard, and that's what they're doing. We're like killing a buffer area. They're going to plant it with like silver maple, hackberry, all these like sort of riparian type area shrubs to try to get that above and shade out any other reed canary grass that'll eventually come back probably.
Oh, the grasses. Now I'm just thinking about all the grasses.
Yeah.
There's a million of
them. Back to the oak savanna.
Yeah.
What, okay, so we just kind of touched the ground, but the trees, I mean, obviously oak trees are going to be some of the most beneficial trees to the local environment. What about understory trees and shrubs in that ecosystem?
I love trees. I love like the mid-story, understory shrubs because they're so interesting. The one that I like a lot that I think is relatively easy to grow is bladdernut. So that has an interesting, I think there's about 10 species in the world. So it's there's only one in New England. I'm not sure if you guys have it there. It's Staphylia, Staphlea. Trifolia is the species name on it. Has really interesting fruits in the fall, kind of like these 3-lobed floating things. Each lobe contains one seed, and all the seeds sort of appear at the top of the lobe, and so they're usually a riparian area plant, so they fall off the tree and then they'll float on the water, and that's how they sort of get dispersed. But they're edible for us. You can eat them. They kind of taste like a nuttier pistachio. So they have a historical use of like, being used as a food source. The other one I really like is hackberry. So that's in the cannabis family. Celtis occidentalis is the name on that species. Really interesting bark. They get huge. Somebody just sent me a picture of the wood on it. So they had like made a board out of it, and it has spalting, but it's like not patchy like it is in sugar maple sometimes. It's like completely consistent throughout the board, which is really interesting. So that I had never seen that before. Somebody sent that to me, and they said that they actually like that wood a lot for woodworking. And up where I am, it's like I see that plant. I've probably seen that plant like 3 or 4 times. It's kind of not very common where I'm from locally, but like the further north you go, it shows up.
It's hackberry's interesting. It's funny you say that because I see them on properties all the time around here. I mean, some properties have a lot of them, some properties have very few. And you walk the property with one person, they have no idea what it is. And you walk the property with a logger and they know what it is and they don't want anything to do with it. And then I just was on a property a few weeks ago with a gentleman and he didn't know what it was, but I observed this very large hackberry because we don't see a lot of real big ones around here. And I mentioned it, and then actually an interesting note on hackberry is that they're on every single continent. They're the only tree species on every continent aside from Antarctica. And I made that comment, and then he's like, "Oh, that's what a hackberry looks like." He's like, "My brother-in-law used to own a furniture business," and he's like, he loved hackberry. And I've never actually seen the wood. I'm Googling it right now because I've never actually seen the wood, because every logger I've talked to, they're like, we'll leave them, or it's pallet wood, nothing special about it. But that's interesting. The bark on a hackberry tree, I'll throw a picture up when I splice this together for YouTube, but it's very unique bark for sure. It's very quirky, distinguished. Yeah.
So the other thing that I think about is like, I would love to be able to plant in such a biodiversity that you sort of get flowers throughout the season. So early season things for us are like spice bush, native honeysuckles. Those are all going to flower almost first. And really our first flowering plants are like red maple, right? But then you get into those shrubs, and then later into the season, there are other, like dogwoods there's a bunch of species of dogwoods that are really easy to root just from like cuttings, bare root cuttings. You can snip them at the right time of year and just stick them in the ground and they'll take off. I guess I just try to like find out, and it's really easy to Google what you want to plant and see when the flowering time is. So you can sort of like, I like to try to have something for wildlife throughout the season, right? So I want to make sure that I can cover all those bases with whatever I plant.
Yeah, that's good stuff. That's we're on the same page for sure. I mean, Taylor's probably more just thinking about what his cows can eat, but
no, I'm big goats. On I like the oaks. I don't have goats. But I've thought about it for the buckthorn. No, I like planting rows of the multi-storied plants. So what you just mentioned, there were a couple plants I had not thought of. Yeah, our Oak Savannah mimic type production model. What we're doing is hazelnut, chestnut, and apple. Just to pull a.
Sorry, I forgot that was like Oak Savannah related, but here I don't know. You guys have hop hornbeam?
Yep. So ironwood, musclewood.
So there's 2 species. So I'm thinking of Australia, which is the platy one, Ostrya. Our musclewood here I would call Carpinus, which is the sinewy gray one.
Yeah, hop hornbeam, an American hop hornbeam.
Yeah. So does it say Australia? Ostrya? Should be Virginiana.
Yep.
So that's what I call.
That's the platy one, right? The more rough.
Yeah, the platy one. So that's what I see in oak savanna habitat around here. And those are good for turkeys. There's a bunch of like wildlife benefits to that particular species. The other one is also similar like that, a benefit to wildlife species, but I see it in more riparian areas. But down south, I see that Carpinus species growing in uplands. So both of those would be applicable for, I think, that area.
I would say that ironwood it gets a bad name around here.
Why?
And I think it's mostly just because it is a very valuable understory or mid-story tree that fills in after logging, after years of not a lot of management. And again, I think it just comes back to that timeline, the perception of that timeline where, someone goes in and opens up that canopy, that tree kind of starts to fill in, and then, it would mature in time, and everything else would kind of die out. But it's, most of the properties I'm on, we start looking at different tree species, you'll have a handful of select oaks, and then you'll have just most of the area is covered in ironwood at that point in time, which, again, kind of goes back to, if there's too much of one thing, then it's not as beneficial. But it's funny. It's funny how perspectives change over time, because, my grandfather, his nickname was Woody, right? Like the guy ran a chainsaw all the time up until he was 90 some years old. He would even show up at our farm and clear off trees on fence lines throughout the winter time and whatnot. But they always talk negatively about ironwood. And that's how I felt about it too, up until a couple of years ago, when I started to actually like dig into stuff a lot more. And, every tree has some value. Every native plant in general has some value. And I started to dig into that and see the value in them. And now I don't suggest that people cut them all down, but that was one of those trees where, for a long time, it was like, get rid of the ironwood, get some more stuff growing in here. And we still thin them out, or cut them out completely in pockets where we want more regeneration. But no, ironwood or hop hornbeam and musclewood's a cool cousin of it, right? Or the bark that looks striated like mussels.
The other one is like, I observe deer, not directly in the woods, but they're the things that they do, I observe. And so like I see them scraping up striped maple all over the place. So if I was thinking, like, they obviously like that plant to some degree because they're using it because it has soft bark and they can, like, tear it up and you see it all in shreds. That would be something that I would probably, if I was trying to manage for deer, I'd probably leave those in the, because they're never, they're mid-story trees. They're not going to really like outcompete my timber species if I'm doing that in that area as well. But then they're going to provide that niche need for that species to like scrape their antlers up against it.
Everything has a purpose, right? Everything native again.
The other one is like, you guys are talking about like mast for these, trying to attract them with like nuts or things like that. Right?
in Taylor's situation, and even in my situation, I'm doing more of this type of plantings where we're trying to get mass production value out of these plantings. And so one of the things that I focus on where applicable is creating habitat that's dual purpose, pays for itself, if not, more so than just covering the cost. But that's where what Taylor was asking about is, these oak savanna type rows grazing in between, but then having rows with some mass production value to them. So I guess on that note, if you can think of things that are more native or as close to native as possible, obviously there's plenty of hybrids in that category, but the more native species that produce mass that would have an abundant value, or where they produce enough that you could actually harvest them for sale.
I mean, hawthorn is that we have a ton of native hawthorn species, and just like the grasses, they're like impossible to tell species on without them in flower. I actually just grouped them all into the same Cretaceous genus, like, because they're so easy to ID, by themselves, but to get them to species is really difficult. But those are ones that we routinely do mass tree release on. So along with like wild apples that we find, even though apples aren't really native to here, but these are, and those get released just like apple trees or an oak tree or whatever. And we just call that soft mast. But that would be something to put in between, because they're not going to get, I've seen them be huge, but it takes them like forever to get that big. Like they wouldn't get enormously sized within your lifetime, but they produce a ton of fruit.
I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
So I think Thomas plants by this rule too, and this is more for, well, annual and perennial production. The tree, shrub, brush type rows, I think, would be another type of biodiversity to add to this. So when we plant anything in a field, we include legumes, grasses, brassicas, and broadleaves, with the idea to create biodiversity, because the theory is those plants are communicating with each other underneath the soil.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thought on the actual communications taking place below the ground? The theory is that these plants are communicating, they're telling each other what nutrients they need to supply. The different types of plants are supplying different types of things that the other plants need then. But I would like to hear your professional
So
thought on that.
you're asking me if the plants are talking to each other and like sharing information?
Soil's
Totally.
communicating.
Yeah, I mean, I think, at the very least, I think we can all agree that we're all connected in some way, and that, plants are connected to fungi and mycorrhizae and nematodes and springtails in the soil and, algae and all this stuff. And like, it has to be working in some sort of symbiosis, but it breaks down, I think, depending on invasive plants, chemicals in the soil, historic use of that piece of property, and then overall like health of the ecosystem. So I think you can, I think as long as you're planting as native as you can in that area, and, and it sounds like we're talking about a place that was probably historically used for, not an intact ecosystem, something that's probably trying to get reclaimed and brought back to what is more in line with a native ecosystem. I think it takes time for those connections to rebuild. And so, you're starting off on this process of like planting native plants, and that will slowly you might see things show up that you never expected to show up there, because you've sort of like built the area for them to come in and recolonize that space, right? So yes, I think that they do communicate, although I don't know how they do it or what they're saying, but they're probably saying thank you, Taylor.
Yeah, but do you think they share with each other? Like,
Yes.
you think they pull stuff from each other?
Yeah, I mean, we know that through, plants in the Orobanchiae family are hemiparasites. Painted Indian paintbrush is a plant that works with a wildflower that associates with different types of grasses. It's not a requirement. You can germinate those wildflower seeds without the host, but eventually that plant does better if it has that host present. So, destruction of grassland is going to hurt that plant, because that plant can only do so well up into a point when it needs to share resources with this other grass species, right? So through evolution, we've all these mycorrhizae plants and all these different species of things have relied on each other at some point. So they have learned how to share resources, communicate. There's obviously plants that do the opposite of that and secrete chemicals to prevent other plants from germinating or getting resources, and they are usually invasive, and they're in an area where they don't have anything to worry about. They have no natural competition, no insects bothering them. The native stuff that would have kept them in check in their own place are not there, so they can sort of like do whatever they want. But I think the intactness of that ecosystem is sharing of resources to some degree, and it's an exchange. It's like, I'm giving you $1 and you're giving me a hot dog, and there's like this, whatever they need, they're sort of like making that assessment. And who knows if it's completely like one species is putting themselves at a detriment to help another species. I don't know that that's been quantified that way. You might be able to like research that and see if somebody's done an experiment to see if like our resources really shared that way. But I think at least at the very bottom, they're sharing some of those sugars and nutrients and all of that stuff to survive, because they really need each other to survive.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah,
well said.
All
I know
right.
I like seeing all the insects now on my place.
I want to
they
learn more
appreciate
about
it.
insects. I want to like know.
Oh man,
It's really interesting to pay attention. I was reading about this the other day too, because I'm going to be doing a lot of work with rare plants. So they're talking about, I've just been like doing a lot of reading and trying to get up on some stuff, but like think about finding a rare plant and it's just one. Okay. So what is the probability that that one plant is going to survive for 10 years by itself? 0. What is the probability that, and that's, it could self-pollinate, but the genetic diversity is a sinkhole, right? Because it's just going to keep self-pollinating and not really be evolving genetically with another population of plants and sharing that, being able to be resilient. But not only that, if you have a population of rare plants, more than one, that's breeding, so that population might not be getting visited by pollinators if it's not of substantial size. So it's not big enough to attract pollinators, so it won't get pollinated, and now your genetic diversity is still in the sink. So what you have to do is you have to think about like, can I do a pollinator planting that's 100 feet from here, that's going to really benefit this rare, even though that's not the rare species, it's just going to attract enough pollinators here to pollinate all these rare plants and start the genetic pool mixing again.
which just like it gives such a good example of how important those plantings are. Because so like I do an example now when I hear it in the summer, like stand in a standing cornfield and just listen, and then like come to like my farm and stand in the pasture and just listen, and it's like this like low humming buzz of so many insects and animals. And then the cornfield is like deafening silence. You might have like cicada in the background or something, but it's crazy. It's like that's how important pollinator plantings are, and planting these types of things with along with agricultural stuff. But yeah,
well, it's also interesting. I'm glad you brought it up again, because I wanted to talk a little bit more about
and frogs,
the rare plant. Yeah, but it's also interesting with those rare plants. It's like if we identify a species of animal in the wild, and there's only a few of them remaining, we can capture that, take it back to captivity, and try to reproduce it, right? But you can't do that with a plant, because that plant's there because of the most plants, especially rare ones, those environmental requirements that actually allowed it to grow in that location to begin with.
Yeah, the example of that was shale barrens, and there's a rare penstemon species that grows on these areas that the companies who do fracking want to frack it. So they want to not preserve these species and drill into it, which puts oil and it changes the chemistry of the environment for that particular plant species. And so some of them have been protected now, but they don't, they're just there to do their fracking work and get out of there, and they don't really care. They think it's dumb that you'd have to protect this one plant growing on the side of this hill, but like who knows what that plant is connected to, and like if that goes away, what else do we lose? And normally we find out that stuff in retrospect, which is crazy, because then it's like we see the things cascade after one of those.
It's scary is what it is.
Yeah, one of those things go away, and then we're like, oh shit, we should have thought about that. Like, yeah, I don't know.
No, I mean, at this point, I think we should just assume that everything is connected. Like you said, I mean, we know everything's connected, unless you're wearing a tinfoil hat, right? Then you'd think that the world kind of revolves around the human species, and it's really quite the opposite. We're only here because of the world evolving the way it has.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're part of it, but we're at such a population right now that I don't think we're really fulfilling our niche like we did before. We're abusing a lot and taking a lot, and our impact is way too much. I don't think we were ever intended to impact our planet as much as we do right now. And so it's, I don't know if we can get back to that spot where we're like, yeah, we've evolved with, primrose, and we need to dig it up. And that's how that plant, grows more plants, is because we get to dig it up and we use it. And that's like, if we did that today, if you were like, oh, everyone should go out and dig up primrose, like there'd be no primrose left. Like, it's just not sustainable, from where we are right now. There's too many people here.
Yeah, well, I think it's important. The important distinction is, I think both of you are doing it. I'm doing it. Is that we are not trying to build sustainable situations, because we are beyond that point. We are restoring the landscape to a point where then we can talk about sustainability.
Yeah. I mean, and there's got to be huge shifts in culture and society, and what we value as a society as important. And it's not, there's only, like you said, only a certain group of us that really are interested in this stuff. And then there's like half of them that are actually going to do anything about it. And then there's half of them that are actually actually getting out in the woods and doing anything about it. And so, we need that to be like the majority of people are like, yeah, this is what I need to like be focused on, because it really matters.
Yeah. And if we don't do something, nature's going to do something for us, right? And that's going to be a hard reset.
We came close.
Yeah.
Came close.
All right. Well, that's a lot of good information. So one thing, I guess this is the curveball of the day. Okay. So I always try to end these episodes with a closing thought, more so a tip, right? My philosophy is, if you want to save the world, you have to start at home, right? So you have to start with yourself, you start with your family, you start with your backyard, and kind of branch out. You can't, these eco warriors that are out picketing in front of municipal buildings and such, they're not really changing things. Maybe they're bringing awareness, right? But they're not really changing things. So you have to start at home. My tip of the week, and you already kind of stole it from me, but my tip of the week was going to be, after this conversation, is, take a look around your yard. If you have a yard, you have the chance to have a positive impact, or a negative impact for that matter. And there's so many things that people can do. Again, these people that complain about the environment, complain about what farming's doing, what anyone else, any industry is doing, but they have a big yard and their landscaping's full of exotic plants. The value that any homeowner can bring to native ecosystems just by simply reducing their lawn size, swapping that out with native wildflowers and native grasses, and swapping out those exotic shrubs in your landscaping with more native shrubs. I think people underestimate the impact that they can have. I mean, lawns are, I think they're the largest cultivated crop in the country. And you already talked about how many chemicals and herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, all these things that are poured onto them that are leaching into our groundwater all the time. It's a big, big issue. So my tip is, especially right now, people aren't really doing lawn care. You can be thinking about a plan when spring rolls around to take some of that lawn away from your maintenance schedule and give it back to the wildlife.
Mm-hmm. So you want me to give a tip?
Yeah. What would be a tip that you could share? Something, again, easy enough. People could take, they could take action on it.
I think the about this a lot, and it's, we all have cameras, we all have these ID apps. If there is access, and you could do this in your yard too, but like even going out on a hiking trail, just pay attention, just see something new and just wonder what it is. That's it. And you take the picture, look it up, Google image search it, but you will learn what that plant is. Or send it to your friend who's a plant person. Send it to me and I'll ID it for you. But like, we need to rebuild that connection with our environment. And if we learn or want to learn what we're seeing when we're out there, it's never going to happen. We have to be connected, and that's how we're going to get connected, is like, even if it's not that plant, maybe it'll be the third plant that like makes your brain turn on and you're like, whoa, this is so cool. I didn't know that like this was happening out in my woods. And that's what I try to do with my social media, right? It's just like, I just want to turn lights on in people's heads and be like, I see this shit all the time. Every time I go out in the woods, I see something new. 80% of the time I'm seeing something new. Just because I'm observant, I'm looking. And we're going to find more rare plants. We'll find historically rare plants that haven't been found in 100 years. If we were all sort of geared into that, you would be having actual known populations of plants, and we could be making real management decisions that way. Right now, we're making management decisions on a statewide scale that are broken, right? Because we don't really have it. There's so much private land in the United States that we have really no idea of what these population densities are like, or if we're missing plants. There could be a new species of plant found in North America. Did you believe that? You could find a new species of plant in North America.
That would be cool.
It could happen before, right?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
That's my tip. Just observe and figure it out. Just figure out what something new every day that you're looking at.
I think that's a great tip. And before I kick it over to Taylor, go ahead and tell everyone where they can find you, what your social media handle is.
Sure. It's at plants.r.people.2. And that's it. I do a podcast sometimes that you can listen to. There's like 36 episodes up there with different people from Prairie Moon Nursery or United Plant Savers, Native Plant Trust, a bunch of episodes for like seed collections and all kinds of stuff. I always talk about native plants or invasive plants, and I usually just, give them the finger because invasive plants are terrible.
I agree. I agree. Taylor, what do you have?
But if you want to reach out,
we'll throw a link. We'll throw a link in the description to the podcast for you for sure.
My tip was going to be, because I'm doing it right now at my place. This is a great time of the year to go and ID the locations that you have bare soil exposed. So throw down a mixed seed blend. It's a good time for frost seeding. And then I like to put old hay on it to increase the biology of that spot. So that's my tip. That's what I'm doing right now. Now that not actually anymore, because we're gonna get a bunch of snow, but that's what I've been doing the last week.
Yeah, you better batten down the hatches. I think we're supposed to get like 6 to 50 inches in the next 36 hours over here.
God.
Yeah. It's sad, but it's all right. It'll be a nice little, what snow does for, you mentioned with maple trees, it's amazing what it does to insulate the ground and kind of protect the ground.
Yep.
So, Tom, it was awesome talking to you, man.
Yeah, Tom, really appreciate it. Lots of great information. I'm probably going to be taking a whole nother page of notes. I already got a full page of notes here, but I'll probably be taking a whole nother page just by listening to this podcast back when I edit it. So I appreciate your time. It was a great conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Good luck with everything you guys do.
Thank you. You as well.
Have a good season.
I can't wait to follow along as you're I guess that was another question I had before we wrap up. Are you going out and searching for these rare plants? Is that your goal with that?
So it's an environmental consulting firm out of Boston, and I'm going to be remote, 100% remote, but it's all, they have contracts. Basically, these bigger companies will want to do something like clear a power line for 30 miles. So before they do that, they either know or they think they know that there's rare plants out there. So I may or may not get a list, or I might have to go out and just ID these things on my own, but I'm going to do surveys for rare plants in these areas. And then I imagine that if there are transmission lines, there's going to be a lot of invasives in there. So luckily I have like 10 years of invasive experience, so I can help them write the contract the right way so that they do things not to disturb these rare plants that we have. But I'll get to go to some places that, like, a lot of our plants hit their northern range in like Connecticut. And then there's another northern range that they hit like in Massachusetts. And then where I am is just like southern Vermont. So I'll get to go down and see a bunch of plants that might be more common down there, but are rare in Vermont. And so what it's going to do is, selfishly, I'm going to get a search image, right, for these plants that I could look in a book and get, like, have an idea, but you really don't know what these plants look like until you see them in person. And that's when you get to, like, when I go out into the woods and see a massive green, I sort of delete everything that I've already seen before, right? And then I'm like down to like those few plants that I don't know, or I'm not quite sure, and so I'll go up and look closer at them. But that's how you find rare plants in these areas, is like you need to have that search image. If you don't, it's like a crapshoot. Like it makes it a lot harder. So it's going to be fun for me to, like, it's sort of my dream job. The guys that I work with now, I was telling them, like, last year, I was like, I should just be doing rare plant surveys and just like walking around the woods. And they were like, I was like, I don't know who's going to pay me to do that. And then this job popped up, and I was like, he was like, oh, so you found the job that's going to pay you just to like do what you want to do? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, that's awesome.
That's the dream, man. Congrats.
That is the dream.
Yeah.
One tip or one piece of advice, as you say that, I'm thinking about this, and I've thought about it before, but there's a lot of young people out there right now that want to get involved in the outdoor industry.
Mm-hmm.
This is where they should go. They should go to school. They should learn plants, learn animals, get connected with companies like you did, or it's like these big companies need boots on the ground people that care about that aspect of what they're doing. And the outdoor industry is already flooded. We don't need more people selling products in the outdoor industry. We need more people protecting the outdoors so that we have an outdoor industry. So,
and I mean, all of this stuff, like, there's nobody, you can just teach yourself. That's the best part of it. You don't need a master's degree. I don't have a master's degree. Like, you can learn plants, because it's sort of like this old thing that was very popular back in the 1800s. It sort of lost popularity. Horticulture has taken it over. Like, they've sort of bastardized all this, like, hybrids and all that stuff. Native plants is having a huge resurgence right now, like, which is awesome for all these people who sort of, we need a lot of young people in this industry. And if you looked at, like, if you did a cross-section look at a botanical club anywhere in the United States, the average age in that group is probably going to be like 70 years old. So there's going to be a huge labor gap really soon. And there's no learning curve. You're going to learn through experience, getting out in the woods. I would just get a job working for a forestry company that's going to put you in that experience every day. And you learn on your own. You're going to be out there, just absorb it and pick something that you want to learn that day and learn that one plant. Now, that going into every other situation, and then you're just constant. I've just been learning for 10 years, and like, I fit into this niche where they need somebody who can, like, ID rare plants, and I can do it because I've just paid attention for 10 years.
Yeah. And it's awesome. It works out.
Yeah,
right?
I'm pumped. I'm ready to do it. I need spring here, like, now.
Yeah. All right. Well, we
sure.
really appreciate your time, Tom.
Yeah.
It's been
Thanks,
great
guys.
talking to you. and we'll stay in touch.
Okay. Have a good day. We'll see you.
Yep, take care.